A former Navy SEAL and his loyal German Shepherd, Fenn, walked to Harbor Light Market for supplies, medicine, food, and things he needed for his small cabin.
Listen to me, Merrick.
Annie
Winter's
Whitlock
here,
looked
and the
at him with
supplies
worry
won't last
and
the
warned
month
him
if
not to
things
take the
keep
narrow
going this
alley
way.
behind the
You have
stalls.
to be...
Take care
But
out there, you
Merrick
two.
still chose
We
that
will.
path, not because he wanted trouble, but because no good man should have to walk around fear. When Merrick and
lost
Fenn
time
entered
back
Bluegrass
there.
Alley,
We need
they
to
saw
move
Pierce
faster.
Haldane, Colton Breck, and
The
Drew
handoff
Salinger
went
standing
clean.
there in expensive clothes,
They won't follow
new
us
boots,
this
and
far.
arrogant smiles. Then Pierce grabbed Merrick's supply bag and dumped everything into the dirty snow. Medicine, food, bread, and the little things that helped him survive. The moment
down.
Colton tried to hurt Fenn, the German Shepherd moved fast,
Fenn, hold!
knocking him down without biting, pinning him in the snow with a warning growl. Before this story begins, please like, subscribe, and stay with us to see how one loyal dog exposed the truth an entire town had ignored. Harbor Light Bay did not look like a place where cruelty could hide. On winter mornings, the northern Minnesota town seemed carved from clean light. Snow rested on the roofs in soft white layers, pine branches bent beneath frost, and far beyond the last row of wooden houses, Lake Superior flashed silver blue beneath a pale sun. The cold was sharp enough to sting the lungs, but it was not a dead cold. It smelled of chimney smoke, apple pies cooling behind bakery windows, damp wool coats, and the faint leather scent drifting from the supply stalls at Harbor Light Market. Merrick Callow walked through that brightness with the careful patience of a man who had learned that pain had its own weather. At 59, Merrick still carried the size and gravity of the soldier he had once been. He stood around 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered and solid through the chest, though his right leg dragged just enough to betray the old injury that war had left behind. His face was square and weather-browned, with a firm jaw, gray-blue eyes set deep beneath a heavy brow, and short dark brown hair that the winter wind always seemed to push backward. Silver marked both temples. A trimmed rough stubble framed his mouth and chin, clean enough to show discipline, wild enough to show that the years had not passed gently. He wore the same faded tan military jacket almost every time people saw him in town. The cloth had gone pale at the elbows and shoulders, as though the coat itself had survived too many seasons to care about looking new. Beneath it was a brown-gray wool sweater, thick enough for the cold, but plain enough for a man who disliked attention. Dark jeans, worn brown boots, black-faced military watch, old leather gloves tucked into one pocket, and a hickory cane in his right hand completed the picture. Every step cost him something. The cane struck the frozen walkway with a hollow tap. His right boot followed, slower than the left, dragging half an inch before he forced it straight. Most people in Harbor Light Bay had grown used to that rhythm. Tap, step, drag, step, tap, step, drag, step. It was not graceful, but it was stubborn, and in a town where winter punished anything weak, stubbornness was close to prayer. Beside him walked Fenn. Fenn was a 6-year-old German Shepherd with a coat of gold and black, so rich it looked painted by firelight. Honey gold fur warmed his face, chest, and forelegs, while a heavy black saddle spread across his back, leaning slightly toward the right hip. His muzzle was dark, almost charcoal, and a thin golden streak ran between his eyes like a small lightning mark. His left ear had a clean notch torn from the edge, an old wound that made him instantly recognizable to anyone who had ever looked closely. Fenn did not move like an ordinary dog. He did not pull at the lead, did not sniff every post, did not bounce toward strangers for attention. He walked with trained stillness, always near Merrick's weakened right side, close enough that the old SEAL could use him for balance if the ice betrayed him. Fenn's amber eyes swept the street, the market stalls, the parked trucks, the children with sleds, the old men drinking coffee near the stove outside Baxter's feed. He noticed everything and announced almost nothing. To most people, Fenn was a beautiful service dog. To Merrick, Fenn was the reason morning still had a shape. The walk to Harbor Light Market was only half a mile from Merrick's small cabin at the edge of the birch woods. But in winter, half a mile could become a battlefield. The trip was not merely for supplies. It was part of Merrick's weekly discipline. The private war he waged against the cage his own body tried to build around him. The doctors had told him years ago that he should limit strain, accept help, avoid unnecessary risk. Merrick had nodded respectfully, and then learned the difference between wisdom and surrender. He did not walk because it was easy. He walked because one day, if he stopped, the world would shrink to the size of his front room. The market opened before noon, glowing under rows of yellow bulbs strung between timber beams. Vendors sold dried fruit, lantern oil, Wool socks, bread, canned soup, dog biscuits, and spare parts for snowmobiles. A radio somewhere played old country music under the clatter of crates. Boots scraped against packed snow. Someone laughed near the coffee stand. A child dropped a mitten and chased it as the wind rolled it along like a tiny blue animal. Merrick stopped at a narrow stall near the east entrance, where a hand-painted sign read, Whitlock, General Supply. Annie Whitlock looked up from tying twine around a stack of brown paper packages. Annie was 67, short and round in the way of women who had spent a lifetime lifting boxes heavier than anyone expected. Her silver-gray hair was pinned in a low bun, though several wisps had escaped around her temples. She wore round wire glasses, a wine-red cardigan beneath a dark blue apron, and a cream scarf tucked carefully at the throat. Her hands were rough, quick, and capable, but her face held the soft worry of someone who had fed half the town on credit and pretended not to remember who owed what. "Well, there's my favorite stubborn man," she said, "and my favorite gentleman in fur." Fenn gave one polite wag of his tail. "Careful," Merrick said, his voice low and gravelly. "He understands flattery. He understands quality," Annie replied, already reaching below the counter, "which is why he likes me." Merrick's mouth lifted, almost a smile. Humor came to him quietly, as if it had to knock before entering. He set his canvas bag on the counter and began naming what he needed. Bandage wraps, pain tablets, batteries, 2 tins of stew, a loaf of rye bread, and the small packet of dried beef strips Fenn liked after long walks. Annie gathered each item without rushing him. She knew better than to treat Merrick like glass. Pity made him close down. Ordinary kindness, however, he accepted like a man accepting a cup of coffee, without ceremony, but not without gratitude. When Merrick reached for a larger sack of dog food stacked near the back, Annie clicked her tongue. "Don't even think about it," she said. "That one's too heavy for your walk home. I've carried heavier, and I've heard men say foolish things before breakfast. Doesn't make them scripture." She wrote something on a small notepad. "I'll have Jonah bring it by after lunch. The lamp oil, too." Merrick looked at her over the counter. Annie raised both brows. "Argue, and I'll charge you double for being difficult." Fenn sat down as if the matter had been settled by the highest court in the land. Merrick exhaled through his nose. Traitor. The dog's ears twitched, but he did not look ashamed. For a moment, the world felt almost gentle. The market breathed around them. Outside the stall, sunlight struck the snow so brightly that the whole street seemed washed in blessing. Merrick listened to the ordinary music of life. The scrape of a shovel, the bell above the bakery door, Annie's pencil scratching prices onto a paper slip, and felt the old ache in his chest ease. Then Annie's hand stopped moving. It was a small thing, a pause, the kind most people would miss, but Fenn did not miss it. His head turned first, amber eyes lifting toward Annie's face. Merrick saw the dog's focus change and followed it. "What is it?" he asked. Annie glanced past him toward the rear lane behind the market, where the wooden buildings leaned close together and the sun fell away into blue shadow. "You shouldn't take Blue Glass Alley today," she said quietly. The name settled between them, like a cold coin. Merrick's fingers tightened once around the handle of his cane. "Why?" Annie did not answer immediately. She picked up the loaf of rye bread, set it down, then adjusted it, though it was already straight. Worry moved across her face, deepening the lines beside her mouth. "Pierce Haldane's been hanging around back there with Colton Breck and Drew Salinger," she said. "Last 3 days, maybe 4. Merrick knew the Haldane name. Everyone in Harborlight Bay knew it. The family owned half the new buildings near the lake road and wanted the other half badly enough to smile while pressing people into corners. "Boys causing trouble?" he asked. "Not boys," Annie said, and for once there was no humor in her voice. "Young men old enough to know better." She described them in quick, careful strokes, like a woman afraid that naming wolves might summon them. Pierce Haldane, 23, handsome in the polished way of expensive things. Blonde hair, pale eyes, and a smile that never warmed. Colton Breck, 22, big as a hockey player, always trying to prove his strength before anyone questioned it. Drew Salinger, 21, thinner, quieter, always holding a phone as if a screen could excuse cowardice. "They record people," Annie continued, "mock them, trip them, scare them, then laugh because nobody wants trouble with their families." Fenn rose from his sit without command. Merrick looked down. The shepherd's body had not gone aggressive, not yet, but his attention had narrowed. His ears stood high, and the muscles along his shoulders shifted beneath the gold-black coat. Annie noticed, her voice lowered further. "Mrs. Bell took a fall last week after they spooked her near the loading dock. Little Owen Briggs had his winter cap thrown onto the roof of the storage shed. Nobody filed anything. Officer Braddock says it's just rich kids acting stupid. Braddock said that? Annie's lips pressed into a thin line. Braddock says a lot of things when the Haldanes are involved. There it was, the deeper crack under the ice. Annie leaned closer. Warren Haldane's people sent letters to half the vendors. Offers to buy. Bad offers. The kind that say please on the first page and threaten you on the second. They want the market gone by spring. A winter resort, they say. Chalet. Heated walkways. Rich folks drinking imported cocoa where old men used to buy bootlesses. Merrick looked toward the rear lane. Sunlight ended just beyond the last row of stalls. Past that, blue glass alley cut between old brick walls and storage sheds before opening onto the road that led toward his cabin. It was the shortest way home. The safe way around would add almost a mile. His right leg throbbed at the thought. A mile was nothing for the man he had once been. For the man standing there now, it was a tax paid in bone. Annie's voice softened. Merrick, please, take the front road. I can call Jonah. He'll walk with you. I appreciate it. That is what you say before doing the opposite. This time Merrick did smile, though sadness lived beneath it. He placed the folded bills on the counter. A person shouldn't have to ask permission from bullies to walk home. No, Annie said. But a living man can still choose a longer road. Merrick packed the lighter supplies into his canvas bag. He moved carefully, placing the pain tablets in an inner pocket so they would not get crushed. Fenn watched him with the calm concern of a creature that knew every hidden wince. Merrick had entered darker alleys in countries whose names people mispronounced at dinner parties. He had stepped through doorways where men waited with rifles, crossed rooms where the floor itself might betray him, carried wounded teammates under skies that burned orange and black. But standing in a bright winter market, with rye bread in a canvas bag and an old woman's fear trembling behind her glasses, he felt something colder than memory. Because this was not war, this was home. And home, he had learned, could become dangerous when decent people started lowering their voices. He took the bag. Annie reached out and touched his sleeve, light as falling snow. Promise me you won't engage, she said. Merrick looked at her hand, then at her face. I'm going home, Annie. That's all. Men like you say that's all, right before thunder starts. Fenn gave a quiet huff, almost agreement. Merrick looked down at him. Not you too. The dog blinked once. Annie wrapped the beef strips separately and tucked them into the top of the bag. For him. Not for you. You're both stubborn, but he has better manners. That's debatable. It is not. Merrick lifted the bag over his left shoulder, keeping his right hand free for the cane. Fenn moved into position without being asked, close to Merrick's weakened side. The shepherd's shoulder brushed Merrick's leg for one breath, not enough to hinder, just enough to say, I am here. They stepped away from the warmth of Whitlock's stall. The market continued as if nothing had shifted. A vendor laughed. A bell rang. Someone called out a price for firewood, yet Merrick felt the air change with every step toward the rear exit. The yellow bulbs seemed dimmer behind him. The smell of coffee faded. The snow outside the back of the market held a bluish shadow, colder and quieter than the street in front. At the mouth of Blue Glass Alley, Merrick paused. The brick walls rose on either side, old and dark, their lower edges crusted with ice. A rusted fire escape clung to one building. Wooden crates stood half buried in snow near the loading doors. Beyond them, the alley bent slightly left before opening toward the road home. Merrick listened. Wind moved through the narrow passage, carrying the faint metallic rattle of a loose sign. Somewhere deeper in the alley came the low murmur of young male voices, careless and amused. A snowmobile engine ticked as it cooled, expensive machinery poorly hidden. Fenn slowed, not stopped, not yet, but slowed. His ears lifted fully. His head turned toward the bend in the alley, his golden black body lowered by a fraction, and the leash between him and Merrick went still as a drawn line. Merrick felt the warning travel up through the leather lead before he understood it in words. Ahead, near a sleek snowmobile parked crooked beside the brick wall, 3 young men stood in the cold blue shade. One leaned with the easy arrogance of someone who had never been denied anything important. One was broad enough to mistake size for courage. The third held a phone down by his side, not recording yet, but ready. Merrick adjusted his grip on the cane. Fenn did not growl. That worried Merrick more. The dog only stared into the alley, amber eyes bright beneath the winter light, as if he had seen the first dark thread of something that had not yet become a storm. And together, the wounded man and the shepherd stepped forward. Merrick Callow knew the shape of danger before danger spoke. It lived in pauses, in shoulders turning too slowly, in laughter that stopped when a weaker man entered the room. It lived in the way Fenn's body tightened beside his right leg, not with panic, but with trained attention. The dog had not growled. That was why Merrick trusted the warning more. Blue Glass Alley narrowed ahead, pressed between old brick walls glazed with winter frost. Snow lay uneven over the ground, hiding the slick patches beneath. A rusted fire escape clung to one building like a broken ladder to heaven, and half-buried wooden crates lined the rear of the market stalls. Beyond the bend, near a new snowmobile that looked too expensive for a working alley, 3 young men waited as if the world had been built to entertain them. Pierce Haldane stood in the center. At 23, Pierce had the kind of beauty that made strangers forgive him before he apologized. He was tall, clean-lined, and pale in the polished way of men who rarely worked under hard sun. His blond hair was combed back neatly despite the wind, and his black leather jacket looked soft enough to cost more than a month of Annie Whitlock's rent. His eyes were a washed-out blue, pretty from a distance, empty up close. He held a paper cup of coffee in one gloved hand and wore a smile that looked practiced in mirrors. To Pierce's left was Colton Breck, 22, broad through the shoulders and thick in the neck, with the heavy confidence of a young man who had mistaken size for authority. His black puffer jacket bore the small logo of his father's snowmobile dealership, a navy hoodie bunched beneath it, and his boots were planted wide on the icy ground, as though the alley itself belonged to him. His face was red from the cold, his brown blonde hair cropped short, one eyebrow marked by a faint scar from old hockey violence. He rolled a snowball between his palms, squeezing it until it cracked like packed bone. Behind them, half in shadow, stood Drew Salinger. Drew was 21, slimmer than the other two, with a long, uncertain face and chestnut brown hair falling over his forehead. His parka was pale green, his scarf gray, his winter shoes too clean for the alley slush. A phone rested in his right hand, not yet raised but ready. He had the look of someone who did not start fires, only stood close enough to feel warm from them. His eyes flicked from Merrick's cane to Fenn's face, then away again. Merrick kept walking. The hickory cane tapped once, then his left foot followed, then the difficult drag of the right. Fenn moved with him, close enough that the shepherd's shoulder nearly brushed Merrick's thigh. The leash remained loose, but Merrick shortened his grip by 2 inches. Pierce's smile widened. "Well," he said, voice smooth and amused, "look what the market sent us. Harbor Light's own winter parade." Colton laughed. Drew gave a small sound that was more breath than laughter. Merrick did not stop. "Morning. It's afternoon," Colton said. "Then I'm behind schedule." Pierce stepped into the center of the alley, blocking the narrowest path with casual precision. He looked Merrick up and down, from the faded tan military jacket to the cane, from the canvas bag to the dog at his side. "You need help crossing, old man? I need to get home." Colton shifted his weight and mimicked Merrick's uneven step, dragging one boot through the snow. Tap, drag, tap, drag. That how they teach walking in retirement homes now. Drew lifted the phone a little. Merrick saw it. He also saw the tremor of hesitation in Drew's wrist. It was not enough to call goodness, but it was enough to mean something still lived there. Fenn took half a step forward. "Fenn," Merrick said softly. "Hold." The shepherd stopped at once. Pierce's eyes moved to the dog. "That thing trained to fetch your slippers too? He's trained to ignore fools when I ask him." Colton's laughter stopped. For 1 second, the alley became quieter than the market had ever been. Wind moved loose snow along the brick wall. Somewhere behind Merrick, a metal sign creaked. Pierce tilted his head as if deciding whether insult amused him or offended him. Then he reached out and snatched the canvas bag from Merrick's shoulder. The movement was fast, childish, and cruel. Merrick's right hand tightened on the cane, but he did not swing it. Pain flared down his injured leg as his balance shifted suddenly. Fenn pressed against him just enough to keep him upright. Pierce held the bag away like a prize. "Let's see what the old warrior buys." "Give it back," Merrick said. There was no panic in his voice, no pleading. That seemed to irritate Pierce more than fear would have. Pierce opened the bag and began pulling things out. A packet of bandage wraps, a small bottle of pain tablets, 2 tins of stew, a loaf of rye bread wrapped in brown paper, the dried beef strips for Fenn. Colton pointed at the bandages. "Look at that, spare parts." Drew's phone was up now. The small red recording dot glowed on the screen. Merrick looked at it, then at Drew, not angry, worse, disappointed. Drew's thumb twitched near the edge of the phone. Pierce held up the beef strips. This for the dog? Fancy snack for a fancy babysitter. Finn's ears angled forward, but he stayed still. Pierce, Drew said quietly. Come on, it's enough. Pierce ignored him. The blond young man turned the bag upside down. Everything fell. The bandages struck the snow first, then the tins, then the bread. The bottle of pain tablets bounced once and rolled toward a black puddle of slush near the wall. The rye bread burst from its paper, landing face down in dirty snow. For a moment, Merrick did not move. He stared at the scattered things with a silence so complete that even Colton seemed to wait for it to break. The items were not expensive. A man could replace bandages. A loaf of bread was no tragedy in itself, but there are humiliations small enough to fit in the hand and heavy enough to bend the spirit. Merrick lowered himself carefully. His injured leg trembled beneath him. He placed the cane against the wall, braced one hand on his left knee, and began picking up the bandages. Pain moved across his face and vanished before anyone else could claim it. At the far end of the alley, Annie Whitlock had appeared near the rear door of her stall. She did not enter. Her wine-red cardigan stood out against the snow, and one hand pressed hard against her throat. Annie had seen enough to understand and not enough to stop it safely. Drew saw her too. For the first time, the phone felt heavier in his hand. Merrick retrieved the pain tablets from the edge of the slush and wiped the bottle on his coat. He picked up the tins. Then he looked at the ruined bread. Pierce laughed softly. Don't look so tragic, it's just bread. Merrick rose slowly, every inch of movement negotiated with his damaged leg. Fenn stayed beside him, amber eyes fixed on Colton now, not Pierce. The dog had already measured the loudest body in the alley and decided where the first mistake would come from. Merrick faced the three young men. You think you dropped my things, he said, but what fell here was not mine. Colton sneered. What's that supposed to mean? It means a man can lose bread and still go home whole. But when he throws another man's dignity into the snow for a laugh, he leaves part of himself down there with it. The words did not land on Pierce first. They landed on Drew. Something changed in the young man's face. It was quick, like a candle flickering behind a window. Drew looked at the phone screen and saw the scene framed inside it. The old soldier bent over scattered bandages, the German shepherd standing still, only because he had been asked, the ruined bread, Colton's grin, Pierce's perfect coat. For the first time, the video did not look funny. It looked like evidence. And Drew, who had recorded so many little cruelties as if a camera could turn shame into entertainment, suddenly saw himself not outside the frame, but trapped inside it. Colton moved. Not far. Not even wisely. Just one angry step, the kind taken by a young man who had been made to feel small and needed something smaller to punish. He pointed at Fenn. Keep preaching, old man. Maybe your dog can pray for you too. Merrick's voice dropped. Do not touch him. Colton smiled, wide and mean. Or what? Or you will learn faster than you want to. Pierce made a low sound of amusement, but his eyes sharpened. Drew lowered the phone by an inch. Colton lifted his boot toward Fenn. It was not a full kick at first. It was a threat shaped like one. A testing motion meant to make the dog flinch and the old man beg. But Fenn had spent years being trained to read the difference between noise and intent. The shepherd did not wait for pain to arrive. He moved. Not like a beast losing control, but like a command given by the body itself. Fenn slipped aside from the boot, drove his shoulder into Colton's lowered leg, and used the icy ground against him. Colton's balance vanished. His boots skidded, arms flailed, and he went down hard on his back, breath bursting from him in a startled grunt. Before Colton could roll, Fenn was over him. The shepherd planted both front paws against Colton's black jacket, pinning him without biting. His muzzle lowered close enough for Colton to see every white tooth. A low growl vibrated through the alley, deep and controlled, more warning than rage. No blood, no attack beyond restraint, just a terrible promise that the next choice belonged to Merrick. Pierce stumbled back against the snowmobile. Drew's phone slipped from his fingers and landed in the snow, still recording the gray sky. Fenn, Merrick said. The dog did not move. Merrick's voice became softer, not louder. Stand down. Fenn lifted his head at once, stepped off Colton, and returned to Merrick's side. The obedience was so immediate that it frightened Pierce more than the takedown had. A wild dog could be excused. A trained one meant someone had chosen not to release all of him. Colton lay gasping, eyes wide. His ankle had twisted under him when he fell, and when he tried to sit up, pain made his face crumple. I'm sorry, he blurted. I'm sorry, okay? Get it away from me. Merrick looked at him for a long second. He was away from you, he said. You came to him. Pierce grabbed Colton under the arm and hauled him up roughly. The movement made Colton hiss through his teeth. Drew snatched his phone from the snow, wiped the screen with his sleeve, and stared at the recording. He could delete it. He should delete it. That was what Pierce would expect, but his thumb did not move. Pierce's face had gone pale with humiliation. His expensive composure had cracked, and something uglier looked through. "You think that was impressive?" he said to Merrick. "You think people will clap because your dog jumped someone?" Merrick put the ruined bread into a nearby trash bin and tucked the usable items back into the canvas bag. "I think your friend tried to kick a service dog and got reminded that gravity still applies to rich boys." Drew almost laughed. He hated himself for almost laughing. Pierce pointed at Merrick, his black glove trembling with anger. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Merrick adjusted the bag on his shoulder. Fenn stood beside him, silent again, as if the whole matter had ended the moment Merrick said it had. "No," Merrick said. "I went to the market." Pierce pulled Colton toward the snowmobile. Drew followed more slowly. At the bend in the alley, he looked back. Fenn was watching him. Not Pierce, not Colton. Drew. There was no growl in the dog's face now. No threat. Just a steady amber gaze that made Drew feel seen in a way he had spent years avoiding. The phone in his hand contained everything. His laughter, Pierce's cruelty, Colton's raised boot, Fenn's restraint, Merrick's wounded dignity standing upright in the snow. Drew put the phone in his pocket without deleting the video. Merrick did not see that small decision. He was busy tying the canvas bag closed with stiff fingers. Annie hurried into the alley only after the snowmobile engine coughed to life, and the three young men disappeared around the far corner. "Merrick," she said, breathless. "Dear Lord, are you hurt?" "No. You are the worst liar in northern Minnesota. My leg hurts." "That's not the same thing." Annie looked at Fenn. The dog sat calmly, as polite as a church usher. And him? Insulted, mostly. Annie let out a shaky breath that became half a laugh and half a sob. She picked up the bandage wrap Merrick had missed and pressed it into his hand. "I should have done something." Merrick's expression softened. "You did. You warned me. That doesn't feel like enough. It rarely does." He gave her the ruined bread wrapper. "Tell me what I owe you for another loaf." Annie stared at him. "If you try to pay for that bread, I will hit you with it." "I believe you." "Good." Merrick gave one small nod, then turned toward the road home. His right leg dragged more than before. Fenn adjusted instantly, walking tighter at his side. The alley behind them returned to its blue winter silence. But something had changed in it. By evening, Drew Salinger sat in his family's large Lakeview house, the phone on the desk before him. His room was warm, clean, and decorated with things bought by people who mistook comfort for character. Hockey trophies lined one shelf, though most of them were from teams where Drew had sat more than played. A framed photograph showed him at 12, smiling beside his younger sister June on a frozen pond. June was 14 now, small and pale, with chestnut hair cut to her shoulders and a snowflake clip near her temple. The accident 3 winters earlier had left her careful on her feet, not broken, but cautious in the way children become when the ground has betrayed them once. She sat in the hallway outside Drew's open door, brushing an old service dog named Maple. Maple was a golden retriever of 11, white around the muzzle, slow in the hips, and gentle-eyed with the patience of a saint who had tolerated too many human mistakes. She had helped June step back outside after the accident. One careful walk at a time. June looked up. "You've been staring at your phone for 20 minutes. Drew locked the screen. "No, I haven't. You're a terrible liar. Everyone keeps saying that today." June smiled faintly. "Maple says it with her eyebrows." The old dog sighed, as if confirming this. Drew looked at Maple's gray muzzle, then at the phone in his hand. He thought of Fenn standing over Colton, teeth showing, power held back by obedience. He thought of Merrick picking bread from dirty snow without begging anyone to stop laughing. "What makes a dog protect someone like that?" Drew asked. June's hand slowed on Maple's fur. "Love, probably, and training, but mostly trust." Drew swallowed. What if someone tried to hurt Maple? June's face changed. The softness left it, replaced by something fierce and wounded. "Why would you ask that?" "I don't know." "Yes, you do." Drew looked away. Maple lifted her head, old eyes resting on him with unbearable calm. Drew did not tell June what had happened. Not yet. He only sat there with the video burning inside his phone, like a coal he could not throw away. For the first time in a long while, he wondered what kind of person he had become, and worse, he wondered whether a dog had noticed before he had. Merrick Callow did not go to the police that afternoon. He thought about it, of course. The thought walked beside him all the way home from Blue Glass Alley, keeping pace with the hollow tap of his hickory cane and the soft crunch of Fenn's paws in the snow. He could still feel the moment when Pierce Haldane had dumped the supplies onto the ground. He could still see the ruined rye bread, face down in slush like something innocent humiliated for sport. But Merrick had lived long enough to know that not every ugly moment should be answered with a hammer. Some young men, he believed, needed the mercy of being ashamed before they needed the weight of a record. He had watched too many lives split open because one foolish hour became the name they carried forever. The world was already too good at burying people beneath their worst mistake. So Merrick went home. His cabin stood where the last houses of Harborlight Bay gave way to birch woods. In winter, the trees looked like pale sentries guarding a chapel maced of snow. The roof was steep, the porch plain, and yellow light glowed behind the windows by late afternoon. It was not a grand place. It was a place that had learned to be enough. Inside, Merrick removed his faded tan military jacket and sat heavily near the stove. His right leg throbbed from the walk, each pulse of pain deep and old. Fenn settled beside him, laying his gold-black head across Merrick's boot, not sleeping, only resting in the manner of dogs who consider peace a duty. "You handled yourself well," Merrick murmured. Fenn lifted his amber eyes. "I know," Merrick said. "You always do." Across town, Pierce Haldane was not thinking about mercy. He stood in the heated garage behind his family's lake house, watching Colton Breck limp in angry circles around a snowmobile. Colton's twisted ankle had swollen just enough to bruise his pride more than his body. He kept touching it, then pretending he had not. Drew Salinger leaned against a workbench, pale and silent, the phone in his pocket heavier than any tool in the room. The Haldane garage was spotless, more showroom than workspace. Snowboards hung on one wall. A black SUV shone under bright ceiling lights. The floor was sealed concrete, smooth as ice. Everything in that place suggested that discomfort was an error money could correct. Pierce did not pace. He stood still, which made his anger colder. "He embarrassed us," Colton said. Pierce's pale blue eyes flicked toward him. "He embarrassed you," Colton stopped. "That dog jumped me. That dog made you look weak." Drew looked up. "Pierce," he told it to stop. It listened. Pierce turned on him slowly. "And that makes it better. It means the dog wasn't out of control. It means the old man knows exactly how dangerous it is," Pierce said, "which makes him worse." Drew said nothing. Pierce walked to the workbench and picked up Drew's phone before Drew could stop him. "Where's the video?" Drew's throat tightened. "I deleted it." Pierce studied his face. "You're lying." "No, I'm not." Colton snorted. "He always looks guilty." "That's just his face." Pierce held the phone out. "Unlock it." Drew did not move. For the first time that night, something sharp and uncertain passed between them. Drew had followed Pierce for years, because it was easier to stand behind power than to stand alone. But the alley had changed something. He could not explain it. He only knew that Fenn's eyes had followed him, as if the dog had seen a door inside him he had been keeping shut. Pierce smiled. "Fine, keep your little conscience. But understand something. My father is meeting with the market board next week. If old men with war stories and service dogs start making noise, people get sentimental. Sentiment ruins deals." At the mention of his father, Warren Haldane entered from the side door. Warren was 55, tall and composed, with steel gray hair combed perfectly back and a camel-colored wool coat hanging open over a charcoal suit. His face was narrow, clean-shaven, and elegant in a way that looked more expensive than handsome. He did not raise his voice. He rarely needed to. Men like Warren learned early that soft words could carry sharper knives than shouting. "I heard enough from the hallway," Warren said. Colton straightened as if a judge had entered. Pierce's expression shifted, not into fear, but into a younger version of obedience. Warren looked at the three of them one by one. "This town is already anxious. The vendors are emotional. The last thing I need is another story about you boys bothering some veteran." "He made us look like," Warren lifted one hand. Pierce stopped. "People who stand in the way of progress need to understand when it is time to move," Warren said. "But if you act like animals in public, you make them sympathetic." Drew heard the sentence differently than Pierce did. To Drew, it sounded like a warning to stop. To Pierce, it sounded like permission to be smarter. By nightfall, snow had begun again over Harborlight Bay. It came quietly at first, slow flakes drifting through the dark like ash from a white fire. Merrick sat at his kitchen table, with the lamp turned low, repairing the leather strap on his leg brace. The brace was old, customized, and stubborn, like him. One of the buckles had loosened during the walk home. His hands worked with steady patience, threading leather through metal while the stove breathed warmth into the room. Fenn lay near the back door, not asleep. His ears shifted at small sounds beyond the walls. Wind scraping along the porch, snow sliding from a pine branch, the distant groan of lake ice far below town. Merrick noticed but did not speak. Fenn often watched the night. Some dogs guarded property. Fenn guarded the invisible line between danger and home. Then the shepherd lifted his head. The movement was small, but Merrick felt it in the room before he saw it. Fenn rose without a sound, his black-tipped tail lowered. He did not bark. He did not rush the door. He stepped backward from the threshold, nose working, then turned and crossed to Merrick. Very gently, he placed his muzzle against Merrick's hand. Merrick stopped repairing the brace. That was not Fenn's signal for deer. It was not his signal for a stranger passing on the road. It was the warning he used when something was wrong, in a way that could not be solved by noise. Merrick reached for his cane. Outside, behind the cabin, three shapes moved between the birch trees. Pierce came first, his black gloves bright against the pale snow whenever moonlight touched them. Colton followed, limping slightly, but trying to hide it. Drew came last, breath tight in his chest, boots sinking into the fresh powder. "This is stupid," Drew whispered. Pierce did not look back. "Then leave. You said we were just going to scare him. We are." Colton held a small paper bag awkwardly in one hand. "Dogs eat anything, right?" Drew's stomach turned. "Fenn is a service dog." Pierce paused near the rear porch, his face half hidden by the hood of his dark coat. "It's an animal." "No," Drew said before he could stop himself. "It's not just." Pierce stepped close enough that Drew smelled coffee and wintergreen gum on his breath. "Say one more word, and the video from last summer goes to your father. Then we'll see how proud the Salingers are of their quiet little son." Drew looked down. Pierce smiled, satisfied, and scattered the contents of the bag near the porch steps. The chapter of cruelty that night did not announce itself with thunder. It arrived as a few small pieces left on clean snow, silent and ordinary-looking beneath the porch light. That was the terror of it. Some sins do not roar when they enter the world. They sit quietly where trust is supposed to live and wait for innocence to come hungry. Inside, Fenn backed farther away from the door. Merrick followed him, each step careful, cane in one hand, flashlight in the other. He opened the inner door but left the storm door latched. Cold air slipped through the frame, carrying a bitter chemical edge beneath the smell of snow and pine. Fenn looked at the porch, then at Merrick. Merrick's jaw hardened. He turned on the outside light. The three figures vanished into the birch woods, boots snapping through crusted snow as they ran. Merrick saw only movement and shadows. He did not pursue. His leg would not allow it, and more importantly, anger had a way of making men enter traps they had not seen. He waited until the woods stilled. Then he opened the door. The snow near the steps held several strange scraps of food, placed too deliberately to be accidental. Fenn remained behind Merrick's leg, obedient and tense, refusing to cross the threshold. Merrick crouched with difficulty, pain flashing white behind his eyes. He took out an empty tin from the shelf beside the door, used a folded piece of cardboard to slide one sample inside, and set it carefully on the porch rail. He took photographs with his phone. The footprints were already softening under new snow, but he captured what he could. 3 sets, one heavier and uneven near the heel, one long strided, one smaller and hesitant. At the edge of the trees, fresh tracks overlapped in a confused hurry. Merrick stood there a long moment. The night was so beautiful it felt obscene. Snow drifted through the yellow porch light like blessings falling on a crime. Behind him, Fenn gave one low, uncertain breath. Merrick went back inside and closed the door. Only then did his hand begin to shake, not from fear. From the effort of holding back fury, he lowered himself to the floor beside Fenn. The shepherd came close at once, pressing his forehead into Merrick's chest. Merrick buried one hand in the thick fur behind Fenn's neck. "They can mock me," he said quietly. "They can spill my bread. They can laugh at the cane." Fenn's amber eyes lifted. "But they do not get to make your loyalty the price of my silence." The dog leaned harder against him. Merrick stayed on the floor until the shaking passed. Morning came bright and sharp. Harbor Light Bay looked clean again, as if the night had not happened. Merrick placed the sealed tin, the photographs, and a written account into a canvas folder. He left Fenn at his side and walked to the small police station near the town hall, a square brick building with an American flag stiff in the wind and a snowbank piled against the steps. The front desk was manned by Officer Roy Braddock, Braddock was 46, heavy through the middle, with a thick neck, a red face, and a brown-gray mustache that seemed to bristle before he spoke. His uniform strained slightly at the belt, and his badge shone brighter than anything else about him. He had small eyes that narrowed at inconvenience. Men like Braddock did not need to be openly cruel to be dangerous. They only had to decide which people were worth paperwork. He looked up when Merrick entered. Callow. Officer. Braddock's eyes dropped to Fenn. Dog allowed in here? He's a service dog. I know what he is. Braddock leaned back. What do you need? Merrick set the folder on the desk. Someone came onto my property last night and left suspicious food near my back door. Fenn alerted before touching it. I have photographs, a sample, and tracks. Braddock did not open the folder. Could been trash dragged by raccoons. Raccoons don't wear boots. Braddock's mouth tightened. You see who did it? I saw 3 figures leaving through the birches, so no identification. Merrick remained still. The day before, 3 young men harassed me in Blue Glass Alley. Pierce Haldane, Colton Breck, and Drew Salinger. One of them threatened me. At Pierce's name, Braddock's expression changed by a fraction. It was the smallest hesitation, but Merrick had spent a life reading smaller ones. Careful with accusations, Braddock said. I'm asking for a report. I'm telling you there's not much to report. Near the file cabinets, a woman in uniform looked up from a stack of forms. Deputy Tessa Rowan was 34, lean and strong in a quiet way, with dark brown hair tied low at the back of her neck and tired gray-brown eyes that missed very little. Her uniform was neat. Her winter jacket hung over a chair, and a blue ink pen rested behind one ear. She carried herself like someone who had learned to survive inside a system without yet deciding whether survival was enough. She watched Merrick, then the unopened folder, then Braddock's hand resting flat over the blotter. Merrick's voice stayed level. A service animal was targeted on my property. Braddock sighed. You don't know that. I know what was left. You know what you think was left. Braddock finally opened the folder, glanced at the first photograph for less than a second, then closed it. I'll make a note. I want a report number. Braddock smiled without warmth. You want a lot for a man with no suspect. Fenn stood, not aggressively, just stood. The movement drew Tessa's eyes. The shepherd did not look at Braddock like a dog begging for permission. He looked at him like a witness. For the first time, Braddock seemed uncomfortable. Tessa stepped forward. I can copy the photos for the file. Braddock turned. Deputy Rowan, I didn't ask for help. No, sir, she said. But if Mr. Callow is requesting documentation, it's cleaner to attach what he brought. The room went still. Braddock stared at her long enough to make the meaning clear. Tessa lowered her gaze, but only slightly. Merrick understood what courage looked like when it was still learning to stand. He slid a spare envelope from the folder and handed it to her. These are copies. Tessa took them. Her fingers were cold but steady. Thank you, Mr. Callow. Braddock pushed back his chair. We're done here. Merrick picked up the folder. No, you are. He turned carefully, Fenn matching his pace, and left the station without another word. Outside, the sunlight struck the snow hard enough to make his eyes ache. Merrick stood beside the flagpole, breathing steam into the air. For a moment, he felt older than 59, older than war, older than patience. Then he took out his phone. Clay Armitage answered on the 4th ring, his voice rough with distance and morning coffee. Merrick? Clay, Merrick said, looking down at Fenn. Someone tried to harm Fenn. The silence on the line changed, not louder, deeper. Tell me everything, Clay said. Inside the station, Braddock waited until Merrick disappeared from the window before picking up his own phone. He turned his back to Tessa, but not far enough. Yeah, he muttered, Callow's making trouble. Tessa remained by the copier, the envelope in her hand. She looked down at the photographs Merrick had given her, then at the blank report form still open on her desk. Her blue pen rested across the top line. For years, she had told herself that surviving under Braddock was not the same as helping him. But as Fenn's amber stare returned to her memory, Tessa understood something that made her stomach tighten. If she let this disappear, the next thing left in the snow might not be meant for a dog. And this time, she wrote, Clay Armitage arrived in Harbor Light Bay the next morning when the sky had turned a hard, polished blue after the storm. His truck came slowly up the snowy road toward Merrick Callow's cabin, tires grinding over packed ice. It was an old dark gray pickup with a cracked windshield corner and a toolbox bolted behind the cab. Nothing about it looked official. That was one of the things Merrick had always trusted about Clay. The man did not need badges, polished shoes, or loud introductions to carry authority into a room. Clay stepped out wearing a charcoal wool coat, dark gloves, and black leather boots dusted with road salt. At 60, he was tall and lean, not broad like Merrick, but hard in the way of old fence wire. His silver hair was cut close to the scalp, and his long face held sharp cheekbones, a straight nose, and eyes the color of winter steel. A thin scar near his left temple disappeared into his hairline when he turned his head. Clay had once investigated things other men preferred to bury: missing equipment, false reports, soldiers blamed for mistakes made above them. He had the patience of a priest and the suspicion of a wolf. Merrick opened the door before Clay knocked. For a moment, neither man spoke. Old friendship did not always need warmth at the surface. Sometimes it lived in the simple fact that one man came when the other called. Clay looked at Merrick's tired face, then down at Fenn. The German shepherd stood beside Merrick's weakened right leg, gold and black fur bright in the morning light. Fenn's amber eye studied Clay for one breath, recognized him from years before, and gave a single quiet wag of his black-tipped tail. Clay nodded to the dog first. Still smarter than both of us. Merrick stepped aside. Always was. Inside the cabin, the stove gave off steady heat. On the kitchen table lay the sealed tin with the suspicious food scraps, printed photos of the tracks, and Merrick's handwritten notes. Clay removed his gloves, opened a worn leather notebook, and listened without interrupting while Merrick recounted the alley. Pierce's threat, the night visit, Fenn's warning, Braddock's refusal, and Deputy Rowan's quiet decision to keep copies. Clay did not curse. He did not pound the table. He only wrote. That made him more frightening than anger. When Merrick finished, Clay closed the notebook. "We are not going after them." Merrick's jaw tightened. "I did not call you to start a war. No. You called because someone crossed a line." Clay looked toward Fenn, and because the local law might be standing on the wrong side of it, Finn's ears shifted at the word law, as if he understood tone better than language. Clay continued, "We document, we preserve. We pass it to someone Braddock cannot smother. If those boys do nothing else, the evidence stands. If they do more, it stands brighter." Merrick gave a slow nod. "No traps. No revenge," Clay said. "No hunting. We only make sure the truth has witnesses." Outside, the snow around the cabin had begun to glitter under the morning sun. Clay moved through the yard with a camera hanging from his neck and evidence bags tucked into his coat pocket. He photographed the porch, the rail, the strange scraps Merrick had collected, and the tracks that remained near the birch line. The storm had softened some edges, but not all. One set of prints was deeper on one side, the weight uneven, matching Colton's injured ankle. Another was longer and confident, cutting straight through the snow. The third was lighter, hesitant, stopping farther from the porch than the others. "Three temperaments," Clay said, crouching with difficulty but more grace than his age suggested. One eager, one angry, one afraid. Merrick stood nearby, leaning on the cane, Fenn at his side. "You can tell that from footprints?" "I can tell it from men. The snow just agrees." Fenn seems... He did not bolt. He lowered his head and walked toward the left side of the birch stand, past the obvious tracks, past the place where the boys had run. His nose skimmed the crusted snow. Then he stopped near a thorny wild rose bush, half buried beneath ice. Clay followed him. What did he find? Fenn nudged the snow once, then looked back at Merrick. Merrick's voice softened. "Show him." The shepherd lowered his muzzle again and pushed aside the powder with careful, controlled movements. Beneath the bush, caught on a thorn, was a small strip of dark fabric. Clay eased it free with tweezers and held it against the light. Black outer shell. Blue lining. Clay took out his phone and pulled up one of Pierce's social media clips that Merrick had mentioned. In the background of a video, Colton Breck stood laughing beside a snowmobile, wearing black gloves with bright blue lining at the wrist. Clay looked at Merrick. "Not enough by itself," he said, "but enough to keep." Fenn was not finished. The dog crossed several yards to a shallow dip near the shed where wind had covered the snow in a smooth white sheet. He sniffed, stopped, and backed away, not frightened, disgusted. Clay crouched again and drew in a careful breath. His eyes narrowed. "Fuel," he said quietly. "Faint. Old enough to be from a machine, maybe. Fresh enough to bother me." Merrick looked toward the cabin, the porch, the dry stacked firewood, the old walls he had rebuilt board by board after the injury sent him home. Fenn stood between the scent and Merrick, body still as a carved guardian. For a few seconds, the bright morning seemed to hold its breath. The dog had not found proof of a future crime. He had found a whisper, thin, bitter, nearly buried beneath clean snow, but some warnings arrived that way. not as thunder, not as prophecy, only as a loyal animal refusing to step where the world pretends nothing is wrong. Clay sealed a sample of snow from the dip and stood. "We need Deputy Rowan." Tessa Rowan contacted Merrick before noon. She did not come to the cabin in a marked vehicle. Instead, she met them behind Annie Whitlock's supply stall during the slow hour when most customers had gone home for lunch. Tessa wore a black winter police jacket over her dark blue uniform, her brown hair tucked beneath a knit cap, her face pale from lack of sleep. Her gray-brown eyes moved first to Merrick, then to Clay, then to Fenn. She had the cautious look of someone stepping onto ice that might crack under her. "I should have done more yesterday," she said. Merrick did not answer immediately. He understood the shape of shame when it came from someone decent. "You kept the report," he said. Tessa swallowed. "I started one. Braddock hasn't signed it. He may try to delete it from the local system." Clay studied her carefully. "Can you preserve a copy?" "I already did." She reached into her coat and handed Clay a folded packet, time-smitted notes, copies of Mr. Callow's photos. "I also wrote that Braddock refused to issue a case number." Clay looked at the packet, then at her. "That could cost you." Tessa's mouth tightened. "It already has. I just don't know the price yet." Annie Whitlock appeared from behind a stack of lantern oil tins, pretending badly that she had not been listening. Annie looked smaller in the daylight than she had in the market's warmth. Her wine-red cardigan was buttoned wrong near the collar, and her round glasses sat low on her nose. But when she spoke, there was iron in the old woman's voice. "It's not only Merrick," she said. "Haldane's people have been squeezing all of us." Clay turned gently toward her. "Tell me." So Annie did. She told them about letters offering insulting prices for stalls that had fed families for 3 generations. She told them about sudden inspection notices after vendors refused to sign. She told them about broken crates, missing delivery tags, boys laughing in the alley, and Braddock calling every incident juvenile nonsense. Her hands shook as she spoke, not because she was weak, but because she had been afraid for so long that courage felt unfamiliar in her fingers. "I'm old," Annie said. "I can lose money, I can lose pride, but I cannot stand by while they make this town teach children that cruelty is just a rich boy's hobby." Merrick looked at her with quiet respect. Clay wrote everything down. Across town, Drew Salinger sat on the back steps of his family home while June brushed Maple in the winter sun. June wore a pale blue coat and the snowflake hair clip she favored on good days. Her movements were careful, but not fragile. Maple, the 11-year-old golden retriever with a white muzzle and patient brown eyes, leaned against the girl's knee like an old nurse who had long ago learned every tremor of her heart. Drew had barely slept. He could still hear Pierce saying it was just an animal. He could still see the scraps drop near Merrick's porch. He could still feel the phone in his pocket, the video from Blue Glass Alley, sitting there like a living accusation. June glanced up. "You look sick." "I'm fine." Everyone says that when they're not. Maple lifted her head and stared at Drew. He tried to laugh. It came out thin. June ran her hand along the old dog's back. "After the accident, I didn't go past the front steps for 3 weeks, Mom begged. Dad bribed me. The therapist tried everything." She smiled faintly. "Maple just sat outside with me every morning until I got tired of being the only one afraid." Drew looked at the dog. June's voice grew softer. "People think service dogs help you move. Sometimes they help you believe the ground won't betray you again." Drew closed his eyes. Fenn was not just a dog. That truth had begun as a pinprick. Now it was a blade. By late afternoon, the pressure inside Pierce Haldane had turned sour. Pierce stood near the windows of his father's office, overlooking the lake road. Warren Haldane sat behind a walnut desk, signing papers with a silver fountain pen. He looked calm, but one folder lay open before him, the market purchase file, marked with delays and objections. "This veteran," Warren said without looking up, "is becoming inconvenient." Pierce's jaw flexed. "I'll handle it." Warren paused. "I do not want another public embarrassment." "You won't get one." "That is not the same as reassurance." Pierce said nothing. Warren finally raised his eyes. "Fear can be useful, Pierce. Stupidity is expensive." Pierce heard only the first sentence. That evening, Clay returned to Merrick's cabin with Tessa's packet, Annie's statement, the fabric sample, and the notes from the property. He advised Merrick to leave for a few nights, stay with Annie, or at least let Clay drive him to a motel outside town. Merrick stood near the window, looking toward the birch woods turning blue in the dusk. "No," Clay exhaled. "Merrick, I will not run from my own home because spoiled men need a lesson from the dark. This is not about pride. No. Merrick placed one hand on Fenn's head. It is about not teaching them that fear works. Clay studied him. Then we do this carefully. Cameras, motion lights, copies of everything to Tessa. State police contact, not local only. Emergency signal if the storm kills reception. No weapons, not unless survival demands it, no ambush. Clay nodded. Witnesses, not revenge. They worked until the cabin looked no different from outside. That was the point. A small camera near the shed. Another watching the porch. A motion light angled away from the road. A radio check with Tessa. A flare packed only as a visibility signal in storm weather. Something to mark location if phones failed. When the final wire was hidden beneath the eave, night had settled fully over the birch trees. Inside, Merrick eased himself into the chair by the window. His leg ached fiercely now, but his face remained calm. Fenn stood before the glass, watching the dark woods with his ears raised. Merrick rested his hand on the shepherd's head. "If the dark comes back," he said quietly, "we do not have to beat it with our fists." Fenn's amber eyes reflected the room's lamplight. "We only have to let the light see it." Night came down over Harbor Light Bay, with the softness that made danger feel almost impossible. Snow moved through the dark in thick, silent sheets, settling on the roof of Merrick Callow's cabin, on the porch rails, on the stacked firewood beneath the eaves. The birch trees around the house stood white and narrow under the moonlit clouds, like a congregation gathered for a winter prayer. Nothing in that stillness looked violent. Nothing looked cruel. But Merrick had learned long ago that the worst intentions often arrive quietly. He sat near the front window in his brown-gray sweater, the faded tan military jacket hanging over the back of a chair. His hickory cane rested within reach. His right leg ached beneath the brace, the pain steady and deep, like an old bell tolling from inside the bone. He had taken no extra medicine. He wanted his mind clear. Fenn lay near the back door. The German shepherd's gold and black body was low against the floor, his black saddle of fur blending with the shadows, his honey-colored chest rising and falling slowly. His left ear, the one with the small torn notch, turned toward every minor sound. Fenn was not nervous. Nervous dogs wasted motion. Fenn was waiting. Clay Armitage's voice came through the small radio on the kitchen table. "Check." Merrick picked it up. "Here, still quiet?" "Quiet is not the same as empty." A pause. Then Clay said, "No, it is not." Clay was inside the old storage shed beyond the tree line, monitoring the cameras with Deputy Tessa Rowan and a state police investigator named Sergeant Elise Morrow. Elise was 42, tall and spare, with dark skin, close-cropped black hair, and a face made stern by years of listening to people lie. She wore a Navy State Police parka over a plain tactical vest, and though she spoke little, every sentence landed with the weight of a locked door. She had agreed to come after Tessa sent the copied report, Clay's photographs, and Annie Whitlock's statement. Elise did not trust local rumors. She trusted patterns, evidence, and the kind of fear small towns tried to hide under polite language. "We hold unless there is direct threat," Elise had said earlier. "No heroics. We document, protect, and intervene when necessary." Merrick had liked her immediately. Outside, beyond the nearest line of birch, a snowmobile engine murmured and died. Fenn lifted his head. Merrick's fingers closed around the radio. "Clay," he said quietly. "I heard it," Clay answered. The cabin seemed to grow smaller around Merrick. The stove ticked. Snow brushed the windows. His heartbeat slowed, not from calm, but from training. Fear had a place in him. It simply did not get the chair at the head of the table. Near the rear of the property, 3 figures moved between the trees. Pierce Haldane came first, his black leather gloves tucked under the sleeves of a dark winter coat, his blonde hair hidden beneath a hood. Even in the storm, he moved like someone offended by inconvenience. He believed the night belonged to him, because most things had. Colton Breck followed with a limp he tried to disguise. His size made him easy to spot against the pale woods, shoulders hunched, breath fogging hard. He kept glancing toward the cabin as if expecting Fenn to explode through the door. Drew Salinger came last. Drew's face looked almost gray beneath his hood. One hand stayed buried in his parka pocket, fingers wrapped around the small German shepherd keychain June had given him. The metal edges bit into his palm. He welcomed the pain. It was easier than thinking. Pierce stopped behind the stacked firewood and looked at the cabin. "He's home," Colton whispered. "Good," Pierce said. Drew's stomach tightened. "You said we were scaring him." Pierce turned his pale eyes on him. "That is what this is." "No," Drew said. "This is different." Colton swallowed. "Maybe we should just leave the stuff by the porch and go." Pierce's mouth curved. "You two are incredible." One old man with a limp and a dog, and suddenly you found religion. Inside, Fenn stood. He did not bark. He crossed to Merrick and pressed his muzzle into Merrick's hand, then turned his head toward the back door. His body lowered, shoulders tight but controlled. Merrick understood. Not wind, not deer, people. He stood carefully, pain flaring up the right leg like cold fire. He took his cane in one hand and the radio in the other. "They're near the rear porch," Merrick said. Clay answered immediately. "Do not engage. I am moving." "To the safe point?" "Yes." Fenn stayed so close that his shoulder brushed Merrick's weakened side. Together they moved toward the rear hall, not fast, but without wasted motion. The house had been arranged for this. The rug corners were taped down. The back passage had been cleared. The old storm door near the pantry opened toward the side yard, away from the porch. Merrick's first step into the snow nearly broke his breath. The cold went through his sweater. His cane sank half an inch into the powder. His right leg resisted him, stiff and furious, as though his own body were arguing with survival. Fenn adjusted at once, slowing his pace, angling his body so Merrick could lean if the ground betrayed him. They crossed 10 yards that felt like 100. Merrick did not look back at the cabin. He looked at Fenn's shoulders, at the steady rhythm of the dog who had become his second balance, his quiet bridge between pain and motion. Near the porch, Pierce pulled a small container from the shadows beside Colton's boot. The contents were never named, never explained. The intent was enough. He moved toward the wooden steps with a focus that had no place in a prank. Drew saw the side door open. For a moment through the blowing snow, he saw Merrick outside the cabin, moving painfully beside Fenn. Not charging, not threatening, escaping his own home, one step at a time. Something in Drew split. He saw June gripping Maple's old harness after her accident, whispering that she was afraid the ice would swallow her again. He saw Fenn in the alley, powerful enough to harm Colton, but obedient enough to stop. He saw Merrick picking bread out of dirty snow with hands that never shook until someone tried to hurt the dog. Drew's fingers closed around the keychain so hard it cut skin. "Pierce," he said, voice breaking. "Stop." Pierce ignored him. Drew moved before courage could talk him out of it. He lunged forward and kicked the container away from the porch steps. It skidded across the snow, spilling harmlessly into the open yard, away from the house. Colton froze. "Drew, what the?" Pierce spun around and shoved Drew with both hands. Drew fell hard onto his back, snow bursting around him. His hood slipped off, chestnut hair plastered to his forehead, eyes wide with shock and fear. "You weak little coward," Pierce hissed. Drew did not get up, but he did not apologize. That was when Merrick raised the emergency flare. It was not a weapon. It was not revenge. It was only a signal, a red cry against the storm. The light burst upward above the birch trees. For one breath, the whole world turned crimson. Snowflakes flashed like sparks. The white trunks of the birches glowed blood red and holy. Pierce's face, Colton's terror, Drew's tears, Fenn's amber eyes. All of it appeared at once, captured in a color too bright for lies. From the storage shed, floodlights snapped on. State Police. Sergeant Elise Morrow's voice cut through the storm, sharp and steady, hands visible. "Step away from the porch." Clay emerged beside her, tall and lean in his dark coat, not carrying himself like a man looking for a fight, but like a witness who had finally been given daylight. Tessa Rowan came from the opposite side, one hand near her radio, her face pale but determined beneath her knit cap. Colton lifted both hands immediately. Pierce did not. His eyes darted toward the trees, then toward Drew, then toward the cabin. For the first time he looked young, not innocent, just young in the ugly way of someone discovering consequences were not a myth invented for poorer people. "Pierce Haldane," Elise said. "Hands where I can see them. This is insane." Pierce snapped. "We weren't doing anything." Clay's voice was quiet. The cameras disagree. Pierce turned toward him. "You don't know who my father is." Tessa stepped closer. "Tonight, that is not going to help you." Merrick stood near the side yard with Fenn pressed against his leg. His face was drawn from pain, but his eyes were steady. He did not look triumphant. Triumph would have been too small for what had almost happened. Drew sat in the snow, breathing in broken bursts. Fenn looked at him. Then the shepherd did something Merrick did not command. He took 3 slow steps toward Drew. Tessa's hand tightened near her belt. Clay raised a palm slightly, asking everyone to hold. Fenn stopped a few feet away from Drew and lowered his head, sniffing the air. Drew went completely still. His tears ran hot down his face despite the cold. "I'm sorry," Drew whispered, though he did not know whether he was speaking to Fenn, to Merrick, to June. or to whatever part of himself had almost died tonight. Fenn did not growl. He simply turned and walked back to Merrick. The meaning was not forgiveness. Dogs did not issue verdicts for human souls. But Fenn had measured the boy in the snow and found no attack left in him. A vehicle came fast up the snowy drive, headlights swinging wildly. Officer Roy Braddock stepped out before the engine fully died. His uniform coat was unbuttoned, his face red, his mustache stiff with frost. He looked from Pierce to Tessa to Elise, then forced his voice into authority. "I'll handle this," Braddock said. "This is local jurisdiction." Elise did not move. "Not tonight." Braddock's small eyes narrowed. "Sergeant, you are standing on my scene." "No," Tessa said. Everyone looked at her. Tessa's voice shook once, then steadied. This became a state matter the moment reports were suppressed and evidence was ignored. Braddock stared at her as if she had struck him. "You need to be careful, Deputy." Tessa reached into her coat and held up a folder sealed in clear plastic. "I was." Clay's camera hung against his chest. The shed monitor still recorded. Elise's team had seen enough. Braddock's authority, which had once filled a small town like smoke, suddenly looked thin in the red fading light. Elise turned to one of the troopers. "Secure the scene. Separate them. No one leaves." Pierce finally lowered his hands, slowly. Colton looked as if he might vomit. Drew bowed his head and began to cry openly. Merrick lowered himself onto a stump near the side path, his legs shaking from the effort of staying upright. Fenn came to him at once, pressing his shoulder against Merrick's knee. The flare burned out above them, leaving the night blue and white again. But it was not the same darkness. Not anymore. By sunrise, Harborlight Bay knew something had happened at Merrick Callow's cabin. Small towns did not need newspapers to carry fear from porch to porch. It traveled through bakery lines, gas pumps, church steps, and the silence of people who suddenly stopped talking when a police cruiser passed. By 7 in the morning, men at Baxter's Feed had heard that state police were involved. By 8, the women at the bakery knew Pierce Haldane and Colton Breck had been taken in for questioning. By 9, everyone had heard that Officer Roy Braddock had not driven away from the scene in command, but seated stiffly in the passenger side of a state vehicle, his badge no longer enough to make people lower their eyes. Merrick did not celebrate. He sat at his kitchen table with Fenn lying beneath it, the German Shepherd's gold and black body pressed close to his boots. Merrick's right leg throbbed from the night before, and the pain had climbed into his hip by morning. His face looked older in the pale light, not defeated, only worn down by the heavy knowledge that justice, when it finally arrived, did not feel like victory. It felt like a cold room after a storm, safe but full of broken branches. Clay Armitage stood by the stove, warming both hands around a mug of black coffee. His steel gray eyes rested on Merrick with the quiet concern of a man who knew better than to ask whether he was all right. "You should rest," Clay said. "I am sitting. That is not the same thing. It is the version I can tolerate." Clay almost smiled. Almost. A soft knock came at the door. Deputy Tessa Rowan stepped inside, carrying a folder against her chest. She had not slept much. Her dark brown hair was tucked under a knit cap, but loose strands clung to her temples, damp from melted snow. Her gray-brown eyes looked tired and sharper for it. She was still in uniform, though her posture had changed since the day before. Something had been decided inside her, and the decision showed in her shoulders. "Sergeant Morrow wanted me to update you," Tessa said. "Pierce and Colton are being held for questioning. Drew is separate. He's cooperating." Merrick looked down at Fenn. The dog's ears moved at Drew's name. "And Braddock?" Clay asked. "Suspended pending state review. His access to department files has been locked." Tessa exhaled. "I gave them the preserved report and the copies." The words cost her something. Merrick heard it. "Thank you," he said. Tessa looked at him as if the gratitude hurt more than blame would have. "I should have done it sooner. Most people should have," Merrick replied. "You did it before too late became permanent." That was all he offered. It was enough to make Tessa blink hard and look away. By afternoon, the church bell rang, though it was not Sunday. Harborlight Community Chapel stood 2 streets above the market, a small white building with a steep roof, green shutters, and a bell tower that had survived 3 generations of storms. Inside, the old pine floor creaked beneath winter boots. Folding chairs were set in rows, but people stood along the walls because the whole town seemed to have arrived at once. Annie Whitlock sat in the front row at first, hands folded tightly over her wine-red cardigan. Her round glasses kept slipping down her nose. Beside her was Earl Pritchard, the apple seller from the market, a thin 72-year-old man with a bent back. a white beard like frost, and hands permanently stained by fruit crates and cold soil. He had the weary kindness of someone who had spent a life making small things grow and watching stronger men profit from them. Near the aisle stood Mrs. Lorna Bell, 81, a narrow woman wrapped in a lavender coat, her white hair pinned beneath a knitted hat. She leaned on a walker decorated with two plastic cardinals clipped to the front bar. Lorna had lived in Harborlight Bay longer than most of the buildings and had developed a habit of speaking gently until someone lied, at which point her voice could slice bread. In the back, 9-year-old Owen Briggs clutched a blue winter cap in both hands. Owen was small for his age, with freckles scattered across his nose and solemn brown eyes that made him look as if childhood had asked him to understand adult cowardice too early. His mother kept a hand on his shoulder. Merrick sat in the last row. He had chosen the back because attention felt heavier than pain. Fenn lay at his feet, calm but watchful, his amber eyes reflecting the church windows. Clay sat beside Merrick, one long leg stretched carefully into the aisle. Tessa stood near the side door with Sergeant Elise Morrow, who watched the room with a state investigator's stillness. Annie was the first to stand. At first, she looked down at her hands. "I have sold lantern oil in this town for 34 years, she began, her voice thin but clear. "I have given credit to people who never asked for charity and accepted pies as payment from folks too proud to owe money. I know who drinks too much coffee, who lies about needing batteries, and who buys dog treats but pretends they are for someone else." A soft ripple of laughter moved through the chapel. Merrick lowered his eyes. Annie's smile faded. "I also know fear," she said. "I know what it looks like when vendors stop meeting your eyes because they got a letter from Haldane Development. I know what it sounds like when crates are broken behind a stall and Officer Braddock says, 'Boys will be boys.' I know what shame feels like when you warn a good man about an alley because you are too afraid to walk into it yourself." The room went silent. Her hands trembled, but she did not sit down. Pierce Haldane did not make this town afraid by himself. We helped him every time we swallowed the truth to keep the peace. That was when Owen Briggs walked forward. His mother whispered his name, but he did not stop. The boy placed his blue cap on the small table near the front of the chapel. It was bent at the brim, the fabric stretched where it had once been pulled hard. "He threw it on the roof," Owen said, staring at the floor. They all laughed. "Mr. Braddock told my mom it wasn't worth a complaint." No one moved. The cap looked tiny on the table, yet somehow it weighed more than every speech given in that chapel for the last 10 years. And in that moment, Harborlight Bay changed, not with shouting, not with applause, but with the sound of people finally recognizing the small, ordinary shape of what they had allowed. Mrs. Lorna Bell rose next, then Earl, then a woman who sold handmade candles, then a mechanic who admitted he had signed a bad sale agreement because he was afraid inspections would ruin his shop. Story followed story, each one small enough to have been ignored alone, together large enough to become a map of rot under the town's bright snow. Merrick listened without moving. Fenn lifted his head whenever someone's voice broke. The dog did not understand zoning pressure or police procedure or market contracts, but he understood grief. He understood the scent of fear leaving a body after too long trapped inside it. Clay leaned closer to Merrick. Silence has a long invoice. Merrick watched Annie wipe her eyes. "Then I hope the town learns to pay it before the interest kills someone." After the meeting, people did not rush toward Merrick. They approached slowly, as if nearing a man beside a hospital bed. A few thanked him. A few thanked Fenn. One old veteran with a cane of his own simply nodded once and walked away before emotion embarrassed them both. Then Drew Salinger entered the chapel. The room tightened around him. He came with June at his side. June wore her pale blue coat and the little snowflake clip in her chestnut hair. She walked carefully, not because she was fragile, but because winter had taught her respect for ground that looked safe. Her old golden retriever Maple moved beside her at a slow, patient pace, white muzzle lifted, tail low and kind. Drew looked as if he had aged years in one night. His parka hung open, his hair was uncombed, and his face had the gray color of someone who had spent too many hours staring at the worst version of himself. He stopped several feet from Merrick. No one spoke for him. That mattered. June looked at Fenn first, not with fear, but with recognition. To her, Fenn was not frightening. He was a working dog doing sacred labor in a world that rarely called it sacred. She looked at Drew, then at Merrick. "If someone had hurt Maple after my accident," June said softly, "I don't know if I would have gone outside again." Drew's mouth trembled. June continued, her voice small but steady. If Fenn had been hurt, Mr. Callow wouldn't have just lost a dog. He would have lost the one friend who helps him trust the ground. Drew covered his face with one hand. I know, he whispered. I know. Merrick waited. Drew lowered his hand. I laughed. I recorded it. I stood there when Pierce took your bag. I stood there again when things got worse. I kept telling myself I wasn't the one doing it. His voice cracked. But I was there, and being there was enough. Merrick's face remained unreadable. Drew looked down at Fenn. I'm sorry. Fenn stood. The room held its breath. The German shepherd walked toward Drew, not fast, not threatening. His black-tipped tail stayed low. He stopped in front of the young man and sniffed Drew's hand. Drew did not move. Tears slipped down his cheeks. Fenn did not wag. He did not growl either. After a moment, he turned and returned to Merrick's side. Drew broke then, not loudly, but completely. His shoulders folded inward, and June took his hand like she had been waiting for him to become young enough to need her. Merrick finally spoke. An apology does not erase fire. Drew nodded quickly. I know, but it can be the first bucket of water, Merrick said, if you carry it every day after. Tessa stepped forward from the side of the room. Drew is cooperating with state investigators. There may be a recommendation for community service as part of the process. She looked at Merrick. There is a retired working dog rescue outside Duluth. They need volunteers. Merrick did not answer at once. He looked at June, at Maple, at Drew shaking hands, then at Fenn. The shepherd leaned lightly against his leg. If he wants to repair something, Merrick said, let him start with creatures that cannot explain where it hurts. Drew nodded again, unable to speak. Outside the chapel, a cruiser waited near the curb. Pierce Haldane sat in the back seat, separated from the town by glass and consequence. His blond hair was disheveled now, his expensive coat wrinkled, his pale eyes fixed on the chapel doors. Through the window, he watched Annie Whitlock stand beside Tessa Rowan. He watched Clay Armitage help Merrick down the steps. He watched Fenn walk at Merrick's side while people made space for them, not out of fear but respect. For the first time in his life, Pierce saw something his father's money could not purchase, trust. And by the look on his face, he understood that once broken, it did not come back, simply because a Haldane demanded it. 3 months later, winter still held Harbor Light Bay in its white hand, but the town no longer looked the same. The snow was still deep along the curbs. Lake Superior still shone like hammered steel beyond the roofs. The birch wood still bent under frost, yet something in the air had changed, as if the town had opened a window after years of breathing its own fear. Blue Glass Alley had changed most of all. New lamps hung along the brick walls, their warm light spilling over the snow even before sunset. A security camera watched the bend where shadows had once gathered too easily. The broken crates were gone. The loading doors had been repainted, and on the longest wall, where old mortar had cracked like dry skin, students from Harbor Light School had painted a mural. It showed a man with a cane standing beside a German shepherd beneath falling snow. The man in the painting did not look like a superhero. He looked tired, upright, and stubborn. The dog beside him had a black saddle across his back, golden fur at the chest, one notched ear, and amber eyes turned toward the dark end of the alley. Above them was a burst of red light, not painted like fire, but like a star that had briefly remembered the earth. Merrick Callow had refused to attend the unveiling. He said he had a bad leg and no talent for clapping at walls. Annie Whitlock told him he was impossible, which, in her language, meant she loved him. The legal consequences had moved slowly, as consequences often did when rich men hired careful lawyers. Pierce Haldane and Colton Breck faced serious charges and court-ordered restrictions while the investigation continued. Warren Haldane's development project had been frozen under state review, its permits tangled in questions about pressure, intimidation, and payments that no longer looked innocent. Roy Braddock was no longer Officer Braddock to anyone who mattered. His badge had been turned in, his desk emptied, and his name spoken in town with the sad disgust reserved for men who used trust as a pocket to hide money. Deputy Tessa Rowan still wore the same dark uniform, still tied her brown hair low beneath her winter cap, and still looked embarrassed whenever anyone called her brave. The respect people gave her now sat uneasily on her shoulders. I did one thing late, she told Annie one morning. Annie, arranging tins of soup on her shelf, snorted. Then do the next one early. That became something of a saying in Harbor Light Bay. Drew Salinger began his sentence of service on a Thursday at North Star Working Dog Refuge, a low, wind-beaten facility outside Duluth where retired service dogs, Military dogs and police dogs came when age had made them inconvenient to people who confused usefulness with worth. The refuge was run by Marla Keene, 52, a tall, wiry woman with iron gray hair braided down her back and skin roughened by cold kennels and outdoor work. Her left cheek carried a pale scar from a frightened dog she had refused to give up on years before. Marla had narrow green eyes, a voice like gravel, and the habit of looking at apologies as if they were checks that had not yet cleared. She did not dislike Drew. She simply had no interest in his guilt unless it learned how to mop floors. "You want forgiveness?" she asked on his first day, handing him a bucket. Drew looked down at it. "I don't know." "Good. Start with clean water. Forgiveness can wait." June came with him the first 3 mornings. She wore her pale blue winter coat, snowflake clip brightened her chestnut hair, and walked carefully over the icy gravel while Maple, her old golden retriever, moved at her side. Maple's muzzle had grown wider, her hips slower, but her patience remained ocean deep. She greeted every old dog at the refuge like a retired nurse visiting former patients. Drew was clumsy at first. He spilled kibble. He folded blankets badly. He flinched when a scarred Belgian Malinois barked from behind a gate. He apologized too much to dogs who did not understand the words, and not enough to himself in ways that mattered. Then he met Harlan. Harlan was an 11-year-old German shepherd, larger once than he was now. Age had carved hollows near his hips, and a cloudy film softened one eye. His coat was black and tan, faded at the muzzle to ash gray, and one back leg dragged slightly when he turned too quickly. His handler had died the previous winter, and no relative had known what to do with a dog who still woke at dawn, waiting for a command that would never come. Harlan did not approach Drew on the first day, or the second. On the 5th, Drew sat on the concrete outside Harlan's kennel with a bowl of water, saying nothing. Snow tapped softly against the roof. June watched from a bench nearby, one hand resting on Maple's head. After a long while, Harlan rose, limped to the gate, and lowered himself with a sigh. He pushed his gray muzzle through the bars and rested it against Drew's knee. Drew did not move. His eyes filled before he could stop them. For weeks, he had wanted one dramatic moment to prove he was different now. Harlan gave him something harder, a quiet moment that asked him to show up again tomorrow. That was the day Drew understood that redemption was not thunder. It was water bowls, clean blankets, patient hands, and returning when no one was filming. Back in Harbor Light Bay, Annie had an idea. It began with a crate under her counter labeled spare dog food, then another for winter socks, then another for bandages, batteries, hand warmers, and small grocery cards. People kept leaving things. Sometimes there was a note. Sometimes only a folded bill tucked beneath a tin of stew. One morning, Annie found a single rubber cane tip, new and still in its paper sleeve, placed beside a packet of dog treats. No name, no explanation. She held it in her palm for a long moment. A cane tip was not grand. It would not make headlines. It did not shine like a donation check from a wealthy foundation. But to someone with a bad leg in winter, it could mean the difference between walking home and falling alone. Annie placed it on the shelf and wrote a sign in thick black marker. Fenn, shelf for service dogs, old soldiers, lonely elders, and anyone winter forgot. People started using the name immediately. Merrick objected, of course. "Name it after the market," he said. "No. Name it after the chapel." "No. Name it after Annie Whitlock, who is far more terrifying than any dog in town." Annie considered this. Tempting, but no. Fenn, sitting beside Merrick's weak leg, looked up at the shelf as if he understood that humans were building a small altar out of practical things. Food, socks, medicine, dignity. The town did not become perfect. No town does. Some people still looked away when shame asked too much. Some still whispered that the Haldanes had done good business before Pierce ruined things. Some still believed trouble should remain quiet if possible. But more people than before stopped, pretending silence was peace. Merrick continued, living in his cabin near the birch woods. His leg did not heal into a miracle. Each morning still began with stiffness, the careful fastening of the brace, the first sharp breath when weight met bone. His cane still struck the floor before sunrise. Fenn still rose before him, shook once, and came to stand at his right side like a promise renewed. Children began asking about the dog. Old men at the market began nodding to Merrick, not with pity, but with the solemn respect one winter creature gives another. Women pressed extra bread into his bag. Annie still threatened him whenever he tried to carry anything too heavy. Tessa stopped by the market most mornings for coffee and never sat with her back to the door, which made Clay Armitage like her more when he visited. On the brightest morning in March, Merrick finally walked through Blue Glass Alley again, not because he had to, because he chose to. Fenn walked beside him, gold and black coat shining under the cold sun, notched ear lifted, amber aham. The alley smelled of fresh paint, coffee from the market, and melting snow. Annie was opening her stall at the far end. Tessa stood nearby with a paper cup in one hand. Drew was fastening a new donation bin beneath Fenn's shelf, while June sat on a bench with Maple's white muzzle resting in her lap. No one announced Merrick's arrival. That was how he preferred it. He stopped before the mural. For a long moment, he looked at the painted version of himself and Fenn. He studied the cane, the tired shoulders, the dog's steady stance. The students had been kinder to his face than time had been. They had painted him almost noble. Fenn looked at the dog on the wall, then back at Merrick. Merrick gave a low chuckle. "Don't let it go to your head." A little boy, standing near his mother, pointed at the mural. The boy was maybe 6, round-cheeked, wearing a red knit hat too large for him. His mother, a young woman with dark curls escaping her hood and tired kindness in her eyes, held a grocery bag against one hip. "Mom," the boy whispered loudly, "is that dog a hero?" The mother looked at Fenn, then at Merrick, then at the shelf where someone had just placed a bag of dog food beside a pair of wool gloves. "Yes," she said. "But heroes are not only the ones who stop bad people." The boy frowned. "What else are they?" The woman smiled sadly. "Sometimes they are the ones who keep their pain from turning cruel." Merrick heard her. He did not turn around to accept the words. Praise had always felt like a coat cut for another man. Instead, he lowered one hand onto Fenn's head. Fenn leaned into his palm. The German shepherd looked up at him with amber eyes that held no speeches, no judgment, no need for history to call them anything grand. In those eyes were all the mornings Merrick had thought he could not stand and stood anyway, all the nights when pain had filled the cabin and Fenn had stayed awake beside him, all the quiet miracles that never asked to be named. Annie came to the doorway of her stall and watched them. Drew looked over from the shelf, then looked down and continued tightening the bin properly this time. June smiled. Maple sighed, old and content. Above the alley, the winter sun struck the mural until the painted snow seemed almost to move. Merrick tapped his cane once and stepped forward. Fenn matched him. Tap, step, drag, step. The rhythm continued down Blue Glass Alley. Not beautiful, not easy, but alive. And sometimes, in a world so eager to reward cruelty with attention, alive was the holiest victory of all. In the end, Merrick and Fenn's story reminds us that true strength is not always loud. Sometimes it walks slowly with a cane. Sometimes it limps through pain without asking the world to pity it. Sometimes it has 4 paws, amber eyes, and a loyal heart that senses danger before people are brave enough to name it. This story teaches us that cruelty does not always begin as something huge. It can begin with a laugh at someone weaker, a moment of silence when we should have spoken, or a small wrong we choose to ignore because it is easier to look away. But goodness can begin just as quietly. A hand reaching out, a truth finally spoken, a community deciding that the weak should not have to stand alone. Maybe that is one of the ways God still sends miracles into ordinary life, not always through thunder in the sky or angels at the door, but through loyal companions, honest hearts, and second chances that arrive just before it is too late. Sometimes God's grace looks like a dog refusing to eat what is dangerous. Sometimes it looks like a young man finding the courage to turn away from evil. Sometimes it looks like a wounded veteran who still chooses mercy when anger would be easier. In our daily lives, we may not face the same storm Merrick faced, but we all pass through our own Blue Glass Alley. We see people being mocked, ignored, pushed aside, or made to feel small. In those moments, we have a choice. We can stay silent, or we can become a small light in someone else's winter. So let this story be a reminder. Protect the vulnerable, honor the loyal, speak the truth when silence becomes dangerous, and never underestimate the quiet miracles God places beside us. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Comment below and tell us where you are watching from, and whether you have ever known an animal whose love changed someone's life. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of faith, loyalty, courage, and second chances. May God bless you, protect your family, comfort every lonely heart, and guide each of us to be kinder, braver, and more faithful in the ordinary moments of life.